Well, Ron, excited to talk to you because as I think about people that have lived a life that really speaks to me about challenging me and inspiring me on how to live, you're certainly one of those key people. I appreciate that you've done, and I want to learn more about that today. I mean, when I think about the things that I know about, some of the big blocks about Ron Blue, you had two CPA firms that you're a part of, started and sold in Indiana, came down into the late 70s and were part of a lot of leadership and evangelism, things that were happening in the US, especially in the South and in Atlanta. Out of that, in that time period, started Ronald Blue Company, different name, Financial Christian Concepts, I think. Is that right?
Well, the original name was Christian Financial Management.
Christian Financial Management.
Then we changed it to Ronald Blue and Company.
Right. Then from there, rolled out and started Kingdom Advisors. From there, started Ronald Blue Institute. Sure, I'm missing some key things along the way, but I think now you're also, I don't know the name of it, but the thing that you're working in right now really to try to open up pathways to churches for mentoring and stewardship. Is there a name for that?
Well, it's a part of RBI. We're calling it Financial Wisdom Network.
Okay.
And we did that in order to kind of separate it from RBI just as a name, as we made an effort. And we wanted to get that word wisdom in there. As you know, churches, they tend to, when they talk about money and stewardship and what they teach, they tend to make it transactional as opposed to transformational. And they tend to rely on a product like Financial Peace or Compass or Crown or something like that. So there's not a holistic approach to money and money management in the church at all.
Got it.
Got it.
So did I get that right? Those are a lot of the big bucket items with a lot of other details in between.
Yeah, well, I was also a co-founder with Terry Parker and Larry Burkett of the National Christian Foundation.
Correct.
In 1982. So it was Blue and Company in Indianapolis 56 years ago. And they invited me back this past summer to speak to their partners meeting. And I hadn't had much contact with them in the last 50 years.
Wow.
But they have 550 employees now.
Wow.
And about, I think, 20 offices. And their revenues, something like they're over 100 million now and growing at the rate of about 15% a year. So it was really fun to go back and say, well, what happened? How did all that happen?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what I found was that when I looked at that and Ronald Blue and Company, there were just a few principles that God put in my mind that allowed that growth to occur or caused that growth to occur. So anyway, it's been a fun summer because as you know, I was invited to Ronald Blue Trust, your annual conference last January, and to see what's happened there and to see what happened with Blue and Company is beyond anything I would have ever dreamed, if you will.
That's saying something, Ron, but you tend to dream pretty big, so I'm not sure.
Yeah.
It's never been a struggle for you, I don't think, was dreaming.
Well, you know, my gift, Greg, is that I can draw a trend line from a dot.
Usually, hopefully up.
That's right. Give me an experience and I can draw a trend line from that.
So what were you say teased it out? What were a few of the principles that you captured that you kind of put into place as you implemented, started and grew those businesses? Well,
the first one was they all started with a mission, a vision and a mission. So like Blue and Company, the CPA firm, the mission was to provide, there were 4 or 5 of us that joined together, had all gotten our MBAs from Indiana University together.
Okay.
And we all went to work for one of the big firms. It was the Big 8 at that time. I worked for what's now KPMG in New York. Okay. And our mission was, we thought we could bring big firm expertise and professionalism to small to medium-sized businesses.
Mm.
And that's in fact what happened. And today the mission is still that. They have no objective, no intention whatsoever of merging with a bigger firm or becoming a part of a bigger firm. And they've got a niche.
Mm.
The other thing, in fact, their niche today is healthcare.
Okay.
And in
Makes
India,
sense because of the area, the geography around there. A lot of healthcare companies, right?
well, there's a lot of healthcare, and healthcare, of course, is a big deal now. But it was really circumstantial in that one of my partners had a relationship with a bank president, and that person ended up becoming, I'm sorry, not a bank president, but a executive director of a hospital. And that person ended up becoming the executive director of the Indiana Hospital Association.
Wow.
So he had contact, and really close contact, with the healthcare world. And he got all kinds of referral business. And so they ended up developing a business there. And they're now by far the greatest provider of accounting services and consulting services to hospitals and those related to healthcare. So there was a niche there.
Okay.
So it was mission driven, and we ended up with a niche.
Right.
And with Ronald and Company, the vision, of course, was to help Christians plan and manage their finances so they'd have more to give away. So there was a compelling mission and vision. And once again, we were dealing with a niche, and that was a Christian. And nobody was offering specific advice to the Christian world when it came to money management.
Mm.
And so that was a God thing. And my relationship with Campus Crusade, the first client I had, we helped him develop a plan to give away $1 million and gave it to Campus Crusade. And as a result of that, Campus Crusade ended up using me to speak at all their major donor events.
Sure.
So with no, people would say, well, how'd you market? And I said, well, it was easy. I answered the phone.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that was really right, because I'd go speak at these events and there wasn't anybody that was competing. And my value proposition was, if you want to give away money, I can help you give away money. And so over a period of about 5 or 6 years, developed a national clientele of rich Christians.
Yeah.
And that has exploded. I mean, I am just standing in amazement when I see what the firm is doing today.
Well, what's interesting about it, Ron, and especially the test of time. So I came in 99, then the firm started in 79, and I'm sure you were starting to do some things before it officially started. But financial planning really didn't exist as an industry back then.
Correct.
Certainly not holistic, fee only. I mean, all these things now with depth of, they call it philanthropic, but really helping people with generosity and giving away money and being intentional with their wealth and bringing marriages together and helping impact legacy. I mean, all of the things that kind of came together that were birthed back then. And it's amazing today when we'll still talk to a lot of people that are needing help, and how successful people, however you want to define it, but from a worldly even standpoint, successful people are out there and they've got a financial team, but a lot of times they do not have somebody that's doing the kind of work that we do to help them have a long-term financial strategy, make sure they're on a healthy financial road, and then have somebody in the middle of it from an objective standpoint, fee only, not selling anything, that helps with their other financial team members move in one direction. And so that was the way you started the firm back in 1979. And to say that it's still needed and resonates, I mean, I can't tell you how it resonates, with people. And it's not even selling, it's just sharing, hey, this is what we do. And if people are attracted to that, great. And if they're not, then that's okay too, but a lot of people are attracted to that. Decades later, it's resonating red hot, I would say.
Well, there's no question about that, Greg. And one of the other things that is true of the firm today and was true when I started is I realized very quickly that my limit was going to be maybe 50 clients. And so if I really wanted to accomplish a vision or a mission that was big, it had to be with other people. It was a 2 Timothy 2:2.
Yeah.
So, as you know, I hired Russ and Eric really before I had hardly any business.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hired early,
Mm-hmm.
and I hired to the heart. So, because there was no financial planning industry, there wasn't financial planners out there I could go hire, but I hired to the heart. I hired early, and what resulted then was that business came. When you hire good people, they find something to do.
Right. Yeah. And if you give them capacity, they find
Yeah,
more good things to do. Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
so growth comes from hiring people before you think you need them
Yeah.
and higher
It's a
quality.
hard, it's a faith walk to do that
Well, it
sometimes,
is a
right?
faith walk because
Yeah.
you're spending money on somebody that's going to be non-productive on day one,
Yeah.
but on year 20, they're
Yeah.
your stars.
That's
So
right. Yeah. And I still remember Russ telling the story that you were able to pay him the same thing that he was making as a math teacher. But he was like, but Ron, I only worked 9 months.
I'd forgotten that, but I saw Russ recently, and he reminded me of that.
That's great. I love it.
uh,
So, well, something else that you have put into the company, and I'm trying to to emphasize that anywhere I find it. I've had Charlie Germany and Ken Cottingham and others, Alan Wallace and Bob Stoddard, that have stepped into what we're calling the glide path or sage. They're kind of moving towards their retirement or whatever's next for them. And the biggest value that is so powerful for them to have is the value of multiplication, the value of
mhm.
seeing multiple people, not just one. Passing the baton is good, but really multiplying the legacy behind them, right? And having multiple people that they can point to, go a mentor to help develop, help transition clients carefully and wisely to somebody that I thought would steward them after I had moved on, and to see so many of them moving through that well with a multiplication mindset for the heart of the mission. And when you say hired to the heart, we just talk about that all the time. We're like, we want people, number one, that are committed to the mission. And if they're committed to the mission, I mean, we can, because life's going to be hard no matter what you do, right? So a missional alignment is powerful, but I think that's what you're talking about when you talk about hired to the heart.
Yes, it is, and you can't train that. It comes with the person.
Yeah.
And you mentioned another word that, when I look back, was a part of what my thinking was, and that is that idea of succession.
Mm.
And when we think of succession, we tend to think of succession of leaders, but succession is bigger than that. It's succession of clients.
Mm.
How do you
Yeah.
transfer a client?
Mm.
For example, how do you maintain a client when the spouse dies, especially
Mm-hmm.
when the
Mm-hmm.
husband dies? That's a succession issue also. And nobody can compete with the Blue Trust now in terms of client retention. The idea of working with the second, third, and fourth generations,
Yeah.
well, that's not normally practiced.
Mm.
In fact, I think you may know better than me, but it seems to me that the stat on that is that 70 to 80% of widows change advisors when their husband dies, and in the case of the company, it's about zero.
Yeah. Yeah. It's rare.
Yeah.
Two stories I think that you'll appreciate, because it displays that is, there were clients that had two children, and he was a doctor, and they had a house, and they were thinking, hey, we want to leave this to one of our children, but we don't know how to navigate this conversation because we don't want them to be in competition, but we do want to know if one of them is interested, and what will we do if they're both interested. Anyway, help them navigate that. They have both since passed within the last few years, and now I go to that same house and meet with their daughter and her husband at the same table that they've redesigned and redecorated in place. And it's just like, I'll go here, and it's just like, this is Bill and Gloria's home, and it's their legacy and their generations that I'm able to continue to serve. And we served their son too, who did not take the house. So it's only had one house. It didn't work out well, but And then another spouse. So he passed away in 2014 in May. And then his wife, I go and meet with her, and it's the same thing. We meet at the table where I used to meet with both of them.
Yeah.
And I feel like, yes, I'm serving her, but obviously as a stewardship, I'm serving God through serving her. But then I'm also serving her husband, who, is no longer with us in person. But I know that, I'm thinking about what would he think in terms of how I am serving her, when I go and do that.
Yeah. And that idea of succession at that level is one that is not practiced very, very often. But I think that was a key to the success of the firm, was the fact that we were willing to transfer clients. And, it goes back to the first decision that I made with the CPA firm and then with the financial planning firm, was that the firm was more important than the founder. So if you wanted to have impact, you had to build something that outlived the founder. And it was fascinating to me, because one of the implications of that was, as we divided up equity in the firm as it grew, and I wrote the original partnership agreement, and I put in there that there was vesting of the equity was over 20 years. So it was 5% a year. And the payout was on a note when the person retired and paid out over 10 years. Well, when I was with the firm for 7 years, and the equity that I had on my balance sheet was $1 million. But I'd only been there 7 years. And so I got 35% or $350,000, and they paid that out over 10 years. Well, they could easily do that. And it saved the firm. The firm kind of went right on through that. And as a matter of fact, they're using that same formula today, 6 years later.
And this is the CPA firm in Indy?
Yeah.
Okay. Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
The only thing that they changed was they made the vesting 25 years.
Okay. Push that a little longer, huh?
Yeah. But they've got 70 equity partners, I think, at least. There were 70 in the meeting that I attended this summer.
Well, coming up with those models that incent the right behavior and align the values with the incentives, that's not easy to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there were several things like that. And the idea of a growth mentality and hiring early were probably two of the biggest things that allowed the business to grow. In fact, I've been asked to develop a training program on building a business.
Okay.
So I'm thinking a lot about that. And I think when I look at what God did, there's some things, I think it's going to be fun to put that together. And it might have more impact than anything else that I've done. I hope.
I love it. I love it. I can't wait to hear it. And so a lot of things we're talking about are kind of, after college, this is in your career. I'm curious about when we talk about people's paths and their professional paths and their work path. I was listening to this interview with Jeff Bezos this morning. Never knew his early year story. I don't know if you know his earlier story. He grew up, his mother had him when he was 17.
Wow.
And I think it was his granddad, I believe, that had a farm, and he was 4 years old helping, his granddad around the farm. But he grew up there and learned how to fix things. And I think it was his granddad, but wouldn't call somebody when something went wrong or when he needed something. He would figure out how to do it. And he talked about being a problem solver, and talked about how he learned very early and saw it lived out that you can fix things, that just because, it don't have to be a barrier when something goes wrong or when you need something else, or, you can get help from other people. But he also learned resourcefulness to be able to get things done. And then later he had an interest in physics, and then he had an interest in computer science. But I wonder about those early years and how developmental those were for him in learning how to solve problems, because life, business, whatever we do is a lot of solving problems. Tennis, we're talking about tennis earlier, being on a tennis court, there's a lot of problem solving that's going on there, versus it can be easy mentally to shut down and go, I'm stuck, freak out, I've lost it because something's not working, versus being able to kind of navigate that through. So that's kind of his story a little bit. I haven't gotten deeply into it, but I was just curious. I'm curious about the childhood connection of work, and how you were raised, and how maybe some of those things were seeds that were planted, and may or may not have spoken into things that happened later on.
You mean as far as professional development, or
yeah, just how you were raised?
Okay.
What was there, like a culture of work ethic? What was kind of the culture of the family? What was,
Oh,
some of the things that you were exposed to as a child?
yeah, I grew up in what I would call the typical American culture. I grew up in the 50s, basically, and this was after World War II and after the Korean War, and that was a time of phenomenal change as the soldiers came back and started businesses. And so I was exposed to that. And I grew up in a Dutch home, and the Dutch culture is one of success. It's frankly, to their detriment. Okay.
How so?
Well, it's that your worth is evaluated on your success. Okay. So how much money do you have? How big a house do you have? How big a diamonds your wife wear? And how much money do you have? Success is glorified and honored. And so I grew up in that culture, and I grew up in a home where my mother was one of 8 children, and her mother died in childbirth with the 7th and 8th, who was a set of twins. And so all the kids got farmed out. So my mother stopped going to school in the 8th grade. And my dad grew up on a farm, and they had no money when I was being raised. In fact, when I was being raised, if you lived in 1,000 square foot home, that was pretty good. And if you had a garage, it was really good. Nobody had 2 cars. And so I grew up in a work-oriented culture and a success-driven culture.
Okay.
And there was good and bad to that, but working hard and being successful at what I did was a part of the culture that I grew up in. And I went to college, and I had some athletic accomplishments, not in college, but just I always thought of leading and success. So, I was senior class president of my high school, and I was president of my pledge class and fraternity, and so I didn't even realize I was a leader until many years later. Found out what leadership was.
So early on for you was that, hey, this is something that I want to attain. I've learned the hard work. I've learned kind of what it is to do what needs to be done, and I want to try to achieve this level of what other people in my community and area are calling success.
Yeah, very much so, and evaluated my life on the basis of success. Now, when I went to college, I was the first one in our family to go to college.
Okay.
And I really didn't know much. I didn't have an idea of why I was going to college.
Yeah.
It's just that everybody went to college.
And probably you saw it as a natural course of path of those that have been, what's seen as successful.
Well, yes and no, because when I got to college, I didn't know what I was doing there.
Yeah.
And I tell people, they find it hard to believe, but I flunked out twice.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah.
Well, for a lot of people, if they don't know why they're going someplace, then there's no engagement.
That I didn't have that. And so when I met Judy and we got married, I was a year and a half behind my class. And I had 3 semesters that I had to complete, and I failed all 3 semesters, and then I 4-pointed all the way through graduate school. And so I had the 4.3 semesters in order to get my ACUM up to 2 points so I could graduate. And I had a professor that got me back into college and got me into the MBA program. And recruiters would look at my resume and they say, "What happened?" And I said, "I got married."
It's amazing how it locks in. Right?
Yeah.
All adrift, and then boom, let's go.
Yeah.
So then coming out of that, then you were kind of chasing this idea of success that maybe others had kind of given to you in a sense, right?
Yeah, and that's why I went to work on Wall Street with the world's largest accounting firm.
Yeah.
I wanted to see if I could compete at that level, and found out that Wall Street was no different than Main Street, really.
Yeah.
But it had this mystique about it, and found that I could compete pretty easily with those that were on Wall Street. But it gave me credibility, Greg. I think, being able to say, okay, I worked for the world's largest accounting firm in New York City.
Sure.
It didn't say anything about what I knew or didn't know, but there was this aura of success.
Sure.
So, and I think it helped in building both businesses, those two businesses that I started, just from an optics standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you have to deliver value.
Right. But there's a credibility of that being there, and your background and you being known for that, and that it's easy to grab a hold of. It's good talking points. It connects to people right away. Translates.
Yeah. The other thing that happened when I started Ronald Balloon Company, I visited with Larry Burkett, and Larry asked me, he said, "Are you going to be a business or a ministry?"
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
And I thought a lot about that. And I realized the question he was really asking was, how are you going to capitalize this business?
Right.
And you can go raise money.
Mm-hmm.
You can deliver services and get paid for it. And I always loved the test of the marketplace. So if we were delivering value, people were paying for it. And so as the people on the staff asked me a lot, are we a business or a ministry? And the answer was always yes. We're either a ministry that operates on business principles, or we're a business that has a ministry purpose.
Yeah. Well, and that's a really big deal, Ron. And I've learned a lot about that just from hearing you tell that story many times, and being involved in nonprofits as well as, coaching business leaders. And there can be a misconception that because you're a nonprofit, you're inherently doing something good. Right. When really you break it apart, it's like, hold on, that's just how like you said, how you're funded.
Right.
One is because I guarantee you, knowing lots of nonprofits that are doing amazing work, they still are, they've got money. They're trying to figure out how to get donations because they need to be funded with money. Businesses need to be funded with money. And you can have a business that has really no mission, no, like I'd say heartfelt, broader world mission. You could have nonprofits that really don't have a heartfelt or broader mission. You can have businesses that do, and that really are doing some amazing things and are, tested by the marketplace. And you can have nonprofits that are doing amazing work and where they are, and funded by donors that really care about what they're up to and impacting communities that donors want to see impacted.
Right. Yeah. In fact, I think that I love the test of the marketplace.
Yeah.
And the marketplace can tell you whether you're delivering value on either the profit or nonprofit side.
Sure.
Because if there are exceptions to this, but I always felt like that if you had a charismatic leader in the nonprofit world, you're probably going to survive for quite a while, even if you weren't even delivering value.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you could raise the money.
Sure.
To do that. So how you're funded is a significant decision, and workman is worth his hire. So I believed in charging for the value that I was delivering. I also was delivering it to basically high income people, relatively wealthy people. So,
and there's so many things early on that you put into place that, the objectivity was a big piece of that. Being feeling was a big piece of that. Being tested by the marketplace is a big piece of that, by operating as a business. And I think the main point there that I just take away is that your mission as a believer is we're on mission no matter where we go.
Yeah.
We're representing Christ no matter where we go. And so if we're in a nonprofit, we're a for-profit, but sometimes we go, hey, I want to go over here and do ministry. It's like, hey, listen, wherever you are with the talents and gifts that God's given you, the way that you do it is more than ministry. And obviously, as an organization, you can have an infused culture with values and a mission that you're rallying around, and you can see the impact of that. for us, it's kind of going beyond the money, right? It's, the money part is important because we need to help people take care of that, because people need to know how they're doing, and be good stewards, and be organized and have a plan, and really have a lot of prayer. That's the foundation of that. But then beyond that, man, there's so much to get to, on the other side of some of those money issues. And it's just a blessing to be able to do that every day. But mission is not tied to tax ID entity, nonprofit, for profit, whatever. It's kind of, what are you putting underneath the hood of this thing, and what's the engine for it?
Right. Experience that I had recently is kind of on point. As you know, part of the philosophy of the firm was that retirement is not biblical,
right?
But retirement is. And it was really interesting because the first guy I hired at the CPA firm, I had lunch with him last week. And he's been retired now for 17 years. And I think, and we're basically the same age. And, I'm still going 100% because I have this. The reality is I'm here for a limited time, and God's got a plan for me. And that plan's not retirement.
Yeah. And if you wake up in the morning, then he's got a plan for you that day.
That's right. That's right.
Every day.
Yeah. So I'm fully engaged now, and feel as challenged today as I did 30 years ago.
And the importance there is a few. One, don't from a retirement standpoint in America, it can be a mentality of hurrying up to quit. And so then you work all these hours early on, maybe have the risk of missing the kids while they're growing up and at critical times, and quit for what? If you've been given talents and gifts from God, how are you going to utilize those throughout the whole of your life? And it may shift, and then you may no longer depend on an income, and all of that is true. But for God's sake, remain engaged and remain plugged in to having impact in whatever area of, you think about good to great in the flywheel. It's kind of like, you think about the flywheel, Ron, of the last 5 years, the last 10 years, right? When some of that was built on the foundation of all of those turns that you had for the first 34, it's like they're building on each other. You're just getting more and more multiplication of the ideas, of the network, of the area that you've been going deeper into. You're hitting over here, you're hitting over here. And it's kind of like stopping the flywheel almost, if you just kind of run away from all that gifting. You know what I mean? It's like it's just starting to pick up speed and a lot of energy on its own at that point.
Well, and that brings to mind a thought that I've had also, and that is that when that's going on, and you're growing tends to cause growth.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that you never reach a point where we're done. And
right.
the bigger you get, the bigger you tend to get. I was in the home office some time ago and talking to Russ's son that works in the
Reed.
Yep. And I said, how many people work in the professional athletes division? And he said, they have 10 planners in the professional athletes. Well, I can remember picking up the first athlete.
Yeah, right.
And now you've got 10 planners that focus on that. And I think he said that they're serving 150 athletes.
I think that's right. Yeah.
So this idea, that the company, where it has come, was beyond thinking 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Because you got the professional athletes, you've got the everyday steward, you've got the family office. You did have the CPA firm, now it's spun out.
But wealth, RPA.
Yeah, private wealth.
Yeah. So institutional.
So it has gone way beyond and will tend to continue to do that. And the reason comes back to what we were talking about earlier, and that is you got good people.
Yeah.
And they tend to find things to do.
Right.
So
anything else from your childhood that were experiences around work that really kind of helped instill? Were you working when you were in high school?
Oh, yeah. In fact, Judy said, you need to write down all the jobs you had. I worked in a funeral home helping to embalm people.
Wow. How old were you?
I was 17, I think. I worked on a farm. What they call detasseled corn, which is a horrible job. I lay asphalt working for a contractor. I delivered papers. I delivered donuts for people. And there's others that I did, but there's 7 things that come to my mind. I did all those before I left home.
Mm.
So I always.
How do you think that instructed you into the future in terms of the way you thought about work?
Well, I never thought about not working. Okay. So, and I've never had a goal of getting to a point where I didn't need to work.
Yeah.
I mean, I could quit today.
Sure.
But I'm not going to do that for 2 reasons. Number one, I don't want to, but number 2, and more importantly, Judy wouldn't let me.
That's a good reason.
She said one time, she said, I married you for better or for worse, but not for lunch.
I love that. Talk about how she has sharpened you and your partnership and your team work and your marriage through the years. Because it seems like y'all have she feels like she's a very strong woman that's just really been an encouragement, maybe a challenge to you along the way.
Well, she's a very bright lady and very black and white in a good way. She tends to be pretty self-confident, and I'd classify myself more a people pleaser.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not in her character. She's not a people pleaser, but she relates to people unbelievably.
Mm. And
the reason is she can ask more questions in a short amount of time than you can imagine.
Mm.
She'll talk when she's standing in the line at the grocery store. If it's long enough line, she's got the family history of the person in front of her and back of her.
Wow.
And people that are getting to know her. She did some traveling with a lady. They went someplace buying some furniture, and she said, Judy she talked to everybody. And I went up to the service station this morning to get Cokes for both of us. And the guy behind the counter wanted to know how Judy was. So
we're all complex individuals, right? Sometimes we want to have a label or put label on other people, but there's complexity there. And so y'all have made it through a lot of big decisions, together. I mean, I know on the wall there at National is, the original napkin, grew up in Tucker. So I have a special appreciation because I was at North Lake Mall, right?
Mm-hmm.
The ice cream shop. I don't know if it's Farrell's Ice Cream there at North Lake Mall back in the day.
No, it was at the corner of Piedmont and Peachtree.
Oh, okay. Got it. But it was Farrell's? Was that
Farrell's
right?
Ice Cream, yeah. It was started by a guy named Bob Farrell from Portland, Oregon, who was a strong believer and very involved with Campus Crusade. And so anyway, you're right.
But the decisions that y'all made, I mean, just the interaction that you guys have had through the years as a partner, but it just seems like y'all really have approached marriage as a partnership in terms of the gifts coming together to make each other stronger.
Yeah, I think so. She's certainly been, I tell her, she doesn't believe it, but I get so much wisdom from her.
Mm. And,
there's probably not a time that I speak that I don't quote her in some way. For example, one of the things she says, if it's new, it's not true. And if it's true, it's not new.
Right.
And that's why the advice that we give is not new, but it's true.
Right.
So it's not the latest and greatest. I mean, it's thousands of years old because it's truth. And truth is transcendent. So anyway, that was a quote that she gave that I use a lot. But there's others that it's not coming to mind right now, but she gives me a lot of wisdom. And she doesn't tolerate excuses. Okay?
Yeah. Hold you accountable.
Yeah.
What have been a couple of the hardest challenges professionally, life, whatever you're able to talk about? What I think it's just helpful. Sometimes when we see somebody's path on the outside, it's like we see and we hear about the successes, and when they get introduced, it's about their, typically about their successes, unless there's like a obvious, health issue or something like that they've overcome. But certainly I think in everyone's pathway are a lot of difficulties and challenges and near death experiences. And like, I mean, any business I think that I've ever known about has always had a near death experience. I think that's probably true of a lot of marriages, that they had near death experiences. Maybe as a parent, times where it's like, man, I don't know if we're losing our children to go a different way, that we're not necessarily confident about the direction of their life. So I feel like there's always those challenges and those difficulties, anything that kind of comes to mind, in any aspect of life.
Well, the first 10 years of my professional life, I was 3 years with Pete Marwick and then 7 years with the accounting firm. Actually, first 12 years, and then 2 years in ministry. And 3 of those things that I did vocationally, I traveled a lot. When I was with Pete Marwick, I was doing college recruiting, and during the recruiting season, I'd leave on Sunday night and come back Friday night.
Wow.
When we moved to Atlanta, our oldest child was 11. We had 4, and Judy got pregnant almost just when we got there. Bad pregnancy, difficult pregnancy, and he was a difficult baby because he had a lot of allergies. And so now you had a mom with 5 kids below the age of 12 and a husband that was gone 70% of the time. And she called me at the office one day and said, "How do you get unchristianed?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, if this is the abundant life, I've had all the abundance I can take."
Yeah, that's real.
So when we went to that Pharaoh's, and if you look at those napkins, what you'll see are a lot of goals and objectives that revolve around the family. So it was more than the business. It revolved around the family. And when we went through the process of making the decision, I had a lot of alternatives. And and given the criteria we had, the best decision fell out to be come back to Indianapolis and rejoin the CPA firm. So why didn't I? Well, I didn't because we asked the question, what's the worst thing that could happen if we did that?
Yeah.
And the answer was that we had come out of a very materialistic lifestyle, and we would come right back into that materialistic lifestyle. And we said, we could lose one or more of our kids to the whole area of materialism.
Because it was so immersed where you came from in Indiana, or the area that you were living there.
Yeah. I mean, I belonged to 2 country clubs, and I had good football tickets and basketball tickets had my fraternity brothers, and we lived in a very nice home. I belonged to one terrific golf course and played a lot of golf. And so we had that lifestyle, and we knew what that lifestyle was like, and we felt like we could not go back into that without it being really costly. So the second thing then, what we really did was we designed kind of what we wanted to do, and it was built around the family. And this was something, and I think, Greg, you probably heard me relate the story. I always used to share it when I would share it with new staff, that we had boundaries on travel and work. And the boundaries were, I would never bring work home. And secondly, I would never work on the weekend unless I was traveling. And if I traveled, we tried to limit that to no more than 2 nights a week. Now, if I was not at the dinner table at 6 o'clock, I was gone for the night. Didn't make a difference if I got home at 6:30, I was another night gone, because we had dinner together.
Yeah.
We had breakfast together as a family. And when I looked at it, I realized that except for the travel that I did do, and it was pretty limited, I was working maybe 50 hours a week. And, when you start a business, that's really
Right.
unusual.
Yeah. It's very immersive, right? Requires lots of hours, it's
Yeah.
70, 80
And
hours witness. Yeah.
but we set those boundaries in place, and it was all around the family. We never left the dinner table or the dinner table until the last kid left.
Hmm.
We looked at that as a really time of development. Now
Yeah.
it's harder today with
Yeah.
all of the activities and the youth activities. I'm not sure it could be done today, but we had that boundary in place. And then Judy and I took 2 planning weekends a year, and we would follow kind of a pattern where we would be in separate rooms on Saturday morning and just kind of thinking about what's going good, what's going bad, what do we need to talk about. And then we'd get together in the afternoon on Saturday and talk through our lists.
Hmm.
And we found that, probably 85% of the things we were in agreement with.
Sure.
We agreed on the philosophy of raising kids, of how to do that.
That's not easy. Yeah.
No, it's not easy.
Yeah.
And but we talked that through, and one of the things that came out of that was I would take one of my kids with me every year on a trip. So they saw what I was doing, and we had that time. And you and I talked to us about tennis.
Yeah.
Where you get that time. That's kind of special time, one on one. The second thing that we did is I started with the oldest child and took her to breakfast once a week. And I did that for 2 years, and then she went to college. And then I took the next child, and we went to breakfast once a week. And I went through all of them, and this was fascinating. We got down to 4 of them were gone. We only had one at home. And I said, well, I sure don't need to take Michael to breakfast. I mean, he's got us every morning. But he asked if he could go to breakfast.
Oh, wow.
And the thing that was so insightful was we didn't talk about deep things. Sometimes it was just grunting at each other.
True guys getting together right there.
True guys. I mean, it was 2 guys, yeah. But it was time that was memorable to him, and it was special time. The other thing, Greg, that we realized that was very helpful from a parenting standpoint is we realized that none of our kids grew up in the same home.
Yeah. That right there is such a huge idea that they didn't, even though they didn't, right?
They didn't.
Yeah.
No. They all grew up in a different home. Well, consequently, they all have different experiences.
Yeah.
And when I talk about wealth transfer a lot of times and talk about if you love your kids equally, you'll treat them uniquely.
Right.
This is the way God treats us. And that's one of the outcomes of that, is that the way they view the family, each of them is different because it was different experience for them. And there were some good things and some bad things. We had one child that we didn't even realize it, but Judy was so busy with 5 that when he was little, she just didn't have the time to spend with him. And we think there were some major long-term consequences to that. He's a bright guy and PhD, but he was lonely. And we kind of missed that until later on in life.
It's amazing. You think about certain things in life, Ron, and sometimes you only do them once or just a few times, like parenting. I mean, you went through 5 times, but you went through kind of together. You already had certain things. You were kind of doing it for the first time with them, and you learn a little bit along the way. But there's it's kind of a scary thought, which is why we need so much more awareness of our humility and feedback and seeking counsel and guidance from others, and a lot of prayer. Is we're going through a lot of really important things just for the first time, right?
Yeah.
Marriage, raise a kid. I mean, just all these things. You started businesses for the first time. I mean, just all those things, and you gotta have grace. And I think it's important. There's a lot of legitimate ideas out there, about how kids have been messed up by their parents. But I think that the quotes about parents are just trying to figure it out too. I think that's a really helpful thing for people to understand that, for the failures that our parents had or the ways that they didn't get it right and the way that we wanted them to get it right, they were probably doing for most, they're probably doing the best that they could with what they had at the time.
I think you're nailing it exactly. And I think every parent wants to do the best job possible, I think, in raising their kids. So they're not out to screw up their kids.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
And what we found is with our adult children is you bring another person into the mix, and now you've got a couple, and they've got different experiences, life experiences. Mm-hmm. And so they have to develop their own philosophy and raising kids.
Yeah.
And what they don't want is their parents' input.
Have you found that to be true, Ron?
Absolutely true. Absolutely. A good friend of mine, Dennis Rainey, he's got 6 kids, and he and I have often talked about that. Is their expectations are, because they're a unit, they're a family unit, they're independent. Dennis was telling me that he asked his kids one time, he said, "What are your expectations as far as Barbara and I visiting with you?" And they all had the expectation that they would spend at least 2 weekends a year visiting with them. Well, they've got 6 kids. That's 12 weekends. And Dennis and Barbara had a ministry, and we're working hard. So Howie Hendricks used to say, by the time you got parenting figured out, you're out of a job.
Right. Our third one, man, I'm like, oh, I'm adjusting. I'm so much better of a parent than I was 5 years ago. I think. I don't know if that's actually true or not, but at least that's what I tell myself. You mentioned Dennis Rainey and Howard Hendricks. We had asked Dennis to come last month, actually earlier this month in December. We had our office meeting with all 40 people, and we brought in the Alabama office as well. And we had him share on his stories of Howard Hendricks, because as we continue to pass the baton of the mission and where it came from, to me, the place that I always go back to is Howard Hendricks and Ron Blue having a conversation. This may not be how it happened, but in my mind, don't mess it up if it did happen differently, Ron. But Howard saying, "Hey, listen, Gina and I know, I teach scripture and I teach Bible, and I know the Bible has over 2,000 verses around, on money and planning, but I don't know how we're doing. And I think, Ron, people need help applying the scripture to their finances. And then secondly, Ron, there's all this money in the hands of Christians in North America, and all this need for the gospel and for God's work globally. Go help people learn how to be generous, and him becoming, first client, and all the impact that he had just to kind of help those. I was able to kind of hear him speak, for a number of times, which I feel blessed to have done that. I went through, I guess it's laws of the teacher or laws of the learner. Yeah. One's Bruce Wilkinson and one's him, but just a lot of that teaching in some of his books that he wrote. But so it was really neat to have Dennis share about Prof recently. Mm-hmm. So he just brought both of those names up there in a couple of sentences back to back. So I just share that with you, that we brought Dennis in to share about Howard earlier this month.
Yeah. Dennis, of course, went to Dallas, and an awful lot of people went to Dallas Seminary because of Howie.
Yeah.
This is really fascinating. He and Chuck Colson and Billy Graham, maybe you might throw in Jerry Falwell and Pat Roberts, and there are probably some others, but those names were pretty public, and they were the giants. Bill Bright was another one, and they were the giants. And this was fascinating to me, because I've asked the question recently in several cases, how many of you remember Chuck Colson? And the answer is almost nobody.
Wow. Prison Fellowship.
Or how about Howie Hendricks?
Yeah. Right.
I was in a meeting last week, and I raised that question, and the person, there were 3 of us in that meeting, and one of them knew Howie, but the other one never heard of him. But probably maybe nobody had as much impact on the church as Howie Hendricks did.
Yeah.
And that is still being felt.
Yeah. Yep.
And you've heard me say that everything I started did better after I left. Okay. Well, when I look at what's now Blue Trust, I say, I couldn't have dreamed of that.
Yeah.
But there were certain things that were done that allowed it to happen. And the things that allowed it to happen was the people. The people that bought into the mission and made it work.
Well, and as I think about that this conversation, and that you and Howard have, the vision that y'all saw together and what you saw together, I feel like, yes, 45 years in, a lot of it's happened, but we're still just scratching the surface, right? It's the top tip of the iceberg of what else is possible and who else needs help. Everybody needs help with their finances, and not everybody's going to be a client, nor do they need to be, but there are a lot more people to impact, and it's just a growing number. And so I just kind of see like, wow, that vision that y'all had back then 45 years ago, man, there's so much need for that. And it's only kind of because putting myself in terms of what I was thinking y'all saw in terms of what was needed out there, there's just a lot more to get to, around that. And so appreciate the way that y'all came together to do the work that you've done in a myriad of ways, and the way that you continue to live it out, through the work that you're doing. And it's certainly been a great pleasure of mine. I think we're shaped so much, if you kind of gave counsel to somebody, we were talking about this recently, and how one thing would be to go and work for a company you believe in that has a great culture, another one would be go to work for a mentor that you can learn from. Right. And, I think I've had the pleasure of both of those things, and not just through Ronald Blue company, but I was going to major donor events with Walk Through the Bible and Kingdom Advisors, and all the speakers and teachers and partnerships of NCF and others. It's just it's just been truly shaping for me, as well as the clients, that you get to sit in a special seat, in a seat of honor with clients that you're probably getting more access to their overall life than anybody else is. When you think about their finances, you think about the marriage, you think about the generosity, you think about how they're raising their kids, you think about how they may be involved in leadership. And so for a learner, it's a special seat to sit in, to try to go have an impact and serve well, but then also to receive a lot of the different lessons that are there, along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, without question. And I would say, the best is yet to come. And it is.
Yeah.
So because it's built into the DNA of the firm, the right things. And God has provided this idea of succession. For example, you're a product of that.
Sure.
That came in and worked your way up, and we're ready to take over an office. And when I look at the level of ability that guys like yourself and Aaron Klopfenstein and others that are running the offices now, Daryl down in Houston, really, really talented leaders that is making that happen. And it is doing better than when I was there, because there's multiple leaders that are having just outstanding success. So it's been a joy to watch it.
So an idea that I'm really interested in most recently is, I'm 49. So having lived for, let's say, 46 or 47 years, there are things that I've learned in the last 2 or 3 years that I didn't know prior to that. Right. Mm-hmm. I was talking to my friend Bryce Harding recently, and he was sharing that we were having lunch one day or breakfast, and he just said, at his age, there's so much more that he's even learned more recently. And that to me is just a very interesting and fascinating thing about life, that you are learning and to some degree almost learning bigger and bigger ideas, or more and more nuanced, more and more layers to that. And I just wonder, in the last few years, couple of years, whatever, are there some things that you've learned, or sometimes the learning is just a much deeper conviction of something that you already knew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think. In fact, I think the older I get, the more I realize I don't know. So, kind of even spiritually, I feel like God just keeps. I think, okay, I got this. He says, yeah, but here's another step, and here's another step, and here's another step. And when I feel like I've got it, I feel like I do have it, but I don't have it all.
And this is what I said, there's a deeper level sometimes of conviction I mean, you can know something, intellectually, or have heard of something, and then actually know it and understand it, to then know it and understand it and actually be able to do it, to know it, to understand it, and be able to do it at a very high level, whatever it is. Like there's levels to these things. And I feel like sometimes the deeper the conviction, the powerful that becomes. And I think that's what a lot of life experience teaches you is, you could say life is short when you're 13, right? But when you are maybe 35, you understand it at a different level because you've seen some things happen, and then at 60, 65, you've seen some things happen, and you can understand that one idea at multiple layers of richness. And
Right.
that's all, I mean, that's a really, Ariana, our daughter, had brain surgery earlier this year, and it was a really scary time. And, you just learn about the brevity of life, and things we take for granted, and the power of gratitude every day, because you're not blessed, necessarily, you're not guaranteed a tomorrow. And so it's interesting that life is an ongoing journey, the way that it is.
Yes, and it is. It just never stops.
So what's God teaching you most recently? What are a couple of things that he's been revealing to you?
I think I've done a lot of thinking and work. I had open heart surgery 11 or 12 years ago. And I read a book at that time by a Franciscan priest, Richard Rohr. And the thesis of the book was the same thing of like halftime, moving from success to significance. Sure. And the theory behind it, or the premise, was that you spend the first half of your life kind of making a life, and the second half then letting that life flow out in a significant way. And if you go really deep, in fact, I just got a book yesterday by this Richard Rohr called Immortal Diamonds, and it's built around the idea of first half and second half, but the first half is what he would call the false self, and the second half is the true self. So the false self is what I think I need to do or think to be accepted. So you build this persona, and it's a false persona because it's based upon what other people think for the most part. The true self is, if you really want to boil down to the essence, is what does God say about me?
Yeah.
And that's the true self.
Yeah.
So when you read Romans 8, and you're called a child of God and a joint heir with Christ, and I've been meditating in both Colossians and Philippians the last couple of days, where my life is hidden in Christ. I've died and my life is hidden in Christ. So that's a whole different level. And Rohr would say it's the combination of life and death put together. So it's not two different events. They're one and the same, in that you live life, but you live life because you've died to some of the false aspects of life. So it's been a lot
much like a seed, right? A seed being planted.
And same thing. Yeah. Falls to the ground and it dies, but it has to die in order to live.
Yeah. I was discussing with Ariana. We're on the tennis event one weekend, and I told her we're in some hotel room, and I hit my head on the chandelier, right above the table. There's the light fixture. I hit it twice in one morning. And then we're grabbing all this stuff to go out to the site, and I had left my shoes. And I was like, I could have left a lot of things, but my shoes were pretty important. And I just use that as an example to tell her we're all broken. Nobody's got everything figured out. So when you see that in yourself, just remember that, you're not perfect. You're broken, but also that you're created in the image of God, the Imago Dei. And that's our ultimate story. And in the midst of that, our brokenness, will show up. And when was that time for you? And I mean, you're out here traveling, back to your professional past story. You're out here traveling, you're doing all these things. And then you and Judy determined something happened. You guys decide, hey, we've got to go a different direction. There's a shift that has to occur here.
There was not one event, so I think we've grown older gradually and not eventfully, if you will.
Sure. Yeah.
I feel really blessed because I'll be 82 here in a couple of months, but I feel like I'm 50 in terms of my mental ability and my physical ability. So that's another stage of life, if you will.
Yeah, sure.
And I just hired a fellow that's going to be is the CEO of the Ron Institute. Well, I for the first time, I didn't have something I was moving to.
Mm.
Okay. And so this is a time I'm not moving to something. And so it's a little bit more uncertain. But I do believe this, Greg. I think God gave me, two things that are to be used by other generations. And one was the development of Christian financial advice. And it truly is unique the way it's put together. It's holistic in its approach.
Yep.
It's simple when you get it all down. It's not hard, but it's transformative also with people. And when they get it and understand that God owns it all, that's a transformation occurs. So that piece of advice, I saw Ronald and Company as the proof of concept.
Mm-hmm.
And I illustrate that I hold up a Wall Street Journal and say, there's a lot of good stuff in here. Now, the date on this is April of 2021. Okay, so how relevant is it today?
Right.
And then I hold up the Bible and I say, you need to read this every day and you need to read this every day. And then I put the Wall Street Journal in the Bible, inside the Bible, and say, wisdom advice that is highly professional is what we're all about.
Yeah.
And so that is unique. And then I think that I realized, I have been realizing that the two firms that I started, that are both $100 million firms now, were started. That's a pretty remarkable consequence. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And I can say that without taking credit because I didn't do it. I know that God did it. So and people say, well, you're really leaving a legacy. And I said, no, I'm not leaving a legacy. I get to watch it. I have had the privilege of watching a legacy. Wow. And it's God's legacy.
Yeah.
So this second aspect of now putting together another training program on how to build a Christian financial planning business, I think can have some terrific impact, be it yourself, for example, in building an office, or somebody building a practice or building a business. So I am excited about what the Lord has showed me there that I think is truly unique. And I've got the proof is already there. I've got the ability to look back over 56 years and say, this is what happened.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, it's just, well, I think what's special about it is the fact that you've created and been in such a significant part of founding these organizations. And because I think for most people, we have ideas, but how to turn a vision into reality, how to get people on board with it, how to get the funding, how to build the team. That's just not, those are not easy things to learn. And yet obviously it's something that you learned earlier on and have been able to build on and replicate, through the years with different types of missions that are, somewhat closely related in the financial industry. And I love the work that you're doing at Ronald Institute to get students, not even, financial planning students, just students at large, biblical counsel, literacy, around financial, personal financial habits and perspective that's biblical in nature so that they can be educated with that. And I think it's a required course at some Christian colleges. And then,
it is at Liberty now.
Yeah. And you're going on to do more of that. So when you think about let's kind of close with this area, this topic. So when you think about success as it was given to you early in life, and now, how do you define success? What's success to Ron Blue?
It's success. I think it's probably more knowing what I don't do than anything else. Because
I mean,
I've lived a long time and I can do a lot of things, but I feel like I'm most productive right now, like this last hour and a half that we've spent.
yeah.
I can speak to an awful lot of those things with experience and with authority or authenticity,
Sure.
because they're not theory.
Right.
And so I think what I bring now to the world is I think that from just my perspective, that everything that I've done has led up to this point, and for the first time, I'll explain it this way, Greg, and you'll get this, really get this. But if you're standing on the pulpit and you're preaching, and there's 1,000 people out there in the audience, all 1,000 of them have one question, and you can answer the question. And the question is, how am I doing?
Yeah.
And you could sit down and spend an hour or two with any one of those people and tell them how they're doing. And not
are we going to be okay? Are we doing okay? How are we doing compared to others? The different variants of that question.
That's right. Am I making good decisions? Do you see problems? And you know that you could spend an hour or two with anyone and answer those questions. So we've now got, let's just say, 1,500 people like yourself that could answer those questions. So what I believe, and this is what I'm telling pastors, I say, if people have got it as far as money is concerned, there are certain characteristics that they exhibit. Number one, they're content. And contentment is something that I can experience. I know when I'm content and when I'm not content.
Yeah.
I don't know when I'm financially free.
True.
Or financially independent.
Yeah. Financial freedom versus financial independence.
Yeah. But contentment is the one thing that God promises us that can measure what people think about money and how they're using it. The second thing is, if they're making principle-based decisions, then they can be really confident in the decisions that they're making because they're based on principles and they're not going to change.
Right.
And then the third thing is, I think we've created a common language. This 4-H tool that we put together is a way to explain holistically Christian financial thinking and planning. And it's really simple. So, and what it does is it makes communication between spouses and parents and children and advisor and clients and so forth with a common language. So if I know that I'm thinking of things holistically and making holistic decisions based upon principles, I can feel pretty good about myself financially. And I tell pastors, if you want to see generosity and giving, those things have to be in place before it's maximized. And now we have a Christian financial planning industry.
Right.
And we've got Christian-based or faith-based investments that are out there. And there's a multiplicity of them. And we've got foundations like the National Christian Foundation, which acts like a tool. So we've got people who are already in place. So in Atlanta right now, for example, the Perimeter Church has 4 CKAs on their stewardship committee. 2 of them are RBT or blue whatever, Blue Trust. 2 of them are members of the company, Dan Wolteis and Carol Jakovich.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that what we're doing is we're enabling them to have ministry. So like Dan said, his real passion was teenagers. And so he said, can you help me develop some teenage curriculum? Well, we're in 50 high schools.
Right.
And we were able to just like that to turn over to him teen curriculum.
That's awesome.
And now they've taught it twice at Perimeter, and they're going to have 2 sessions going next spring. So they'll have done it 4 times over about a 1-year period. And we were able to hand him that. So it gave Dan the ability to have ministry that was effective in an area that he has a passion on, and it will certainly benefit the church. Carol's passion is women.
Yeah.
And so we're working with her right now, putting together probably a 1 or 2 hour seminar on raising children. You got a lot of single moms. You got a lot of stay-at-home moms. You got a lot of issues with women. And if we can reach women, we can certainly reach men. So I think where we are is we have got the language, we've got the people, we've got the products and technology that we really could offer to a church a holistic approach to financial stewardship. And what we're saying to them is this is not a product and it's not a program. It's a ministry.
Yeah.
And just like youth ministry, there should be stewardship ministry. So I'm getting ready with a phone call in about 20 minutes with a product of Perimeter's benevolence ministry. Okay, we've been able to help them have the tools to help. Meeting with a single mom with 3 kids that we've been helping support for some time, but she's plugged in at the church.
Yeah.
Okay, so now she can get what she needs at the church. She's not dependent upon us or me. So I think we are positioned where we really could have a cultural impact in the church. Randy can't bring it because he's not a planner.
Yeah.
Crown can't bring it. Compass can't bring it. They got good material, but it doesn't offer what we offer in terms of a holistic approach to looking at somebody's finances. And it's highly transferable. So
Love
it
that.
all started with RBT. I like RBT.
Whatever works. I haven't gotten BT or what we're going to do next, but it's, I did appreciate the name change, Ron, because I would go tell people who I am. I'm Greg Gilbert. I work at, Ronald Blue and Company, Ronald Blue Trust. We'd be talking for a few minutes. I'd get ready to leave and say, hey, it's nice to meet you. They'd go, yeah, it's nice to meet you, Ron. Happened all the time. And I was like, like, if that just clears up that little aspect of my life, I appreciate it. But I love your legacy. I love the way that you've impacted and continue to impact. So thank you for just chasing Jesus. Thank you for just trying to make him known in all these different areas. The way that we've got a client and they were not a believer, and he was a heart physician, and he came through seeing how Bible had practical, wise counsel that impacted his finances. And he'll tell you that was one of the pathways to him becoming a believer. And so I think that it's just a powerful way of helping families. You think about how it's freed up money for generosity and what has that impacted? How many organizations, how much work? You think about the families that work here or have been impacted by the culture, partners have been impacted by the culture, other kind of things that are just a lot of things going on, and not about you, but about what God is up to. And thank you for being used as a vessel in the ways that you have. And I have just a lot of admiration and respect for you. So every time I get to hear you speak, some of these jokes I've heard 16 times and I still just crack up at them.
Yeah, that's the sign of a good joke.
It is a sign of a good joke. So what would your final encouragement to be to if the people out there, if they're clients, if the people that work at the company, or somebody else that just kind of hears this, what was your encouragement to be, to us as we move forward? And I'll just leave it wide open for you.
Well, I just keep on. You're doing what you're doing, and you've got the right attitude and the right commitment, and that's what it's going to take. Is, I would say this: if we had 5,000 Greg Gilberts, we could change the culture for sure. If we had 10,000, we could even change our country. Just think of the impact that somebody like yourself is having with 40 staff now. I don't know how many clients.
40 in Atlanta. Yeah.
Yeah. And how many clients?
Across the whole office, we've got, I think, 1,100.
Okay. 1,100 families.
Across 10 different advisor teams.
Okay. That's a phenomenal impact all by itself. And so when I think of, okay, if we could multiply that 5,000, 10,000 times, then we'll change things. And we've got the ability to do that.
Yeah.
And the proof is right out there. Nobody's going to catch Blue Trust. Okay. Always going to be the leader. I'll never forget my last board meeting at the company, and I was asked, are you going to be out there creating competitors? And my response was, I sure hope so. I said, for two reasons. Number one, competition makes everybody better. And there's nobody that you're competing with right now. And secondly, if I'm successful to do what I think we can do, I'm going to create a fishing pool. And that's what's happening too.
What about to a client, if they're watching this right now? Would your encouragement be to them as they're kind of working through marriage and raising kids and single folks and trying to live out this life and trying to live out their relationship with Christ in many ways, including their finances?
Well, when they think of their finance, I think this: if I'm talking to a client, one of the best decisions that I made, Greg, was that every client manager had to have an advisor.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a reason for that. And the reason is accountability. And when you have accountability with somebody that thinks the way that you think, you're gonna sleep better at night. You're going to make better financial decisions. Secondly, so accountability is one, but secondly, I just experienced the death of a good friend who lives 4 doors down. But that couple has been a client of the firm since I had introduced them to the Charlotte office years ago. And they've been up here in Bloomington now for, I think, 6 or 7 years. But he died. And I had Craig Westrick and Amy from Greenwood office in there, and they have walked her through this process. And I have appreciated watching this, the complexity of being a widow.
Yeah, for sure.
And so my counsel is, if you've got good objective counsel from your Blue advisor, you're doing the best that you can do right now, because you're getting good advice, and you're getting advice that very few people get. So
well, thank you, Ron, again. Appreciate the time today. Appreciate the wisdom. There's so many different little nuggets that we could have gone into for hours. So, but it was we covered a lot of ground in a lot of important areas. So thanks for sharing part of your story, and thanks for all that you do. Grateful for the time.
Well, I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Talk to you soon, Ron.
Okay. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.